In this video, I'm going to talk about the difference between avoidance and PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. And the reason I want to talk about it is I keep hearing a lot of people say that I have PTSD. And I'm a little annoyed by that, even like, therapy people, etc. Because I really respect PTSD, and I think it's its own special, not the right word, but it's its own thing, its own separate thing. And I think it's really wrong for people to take this label and attach it to everything under the sun. And I don't think it applies to avoidance. And here's why. This is what PTSD is. It's a response to a traumatic event. Singular. And avoidance, to become avoidant, you have to have chronic emotional child abuse. That means over a long period. So this wasn't one terrible, awful thing that happened to somebody. It's a long-term personality, shift and adjustment. So right there, no. I mean, you can also have PTSD and avoidance, but they are not the same. To get a diagnosis of PTSD, you need to have one re-experience symptom, which is sort of what's famous, which is either flashbacks or recurrent bad dreams or frightening thoughts. Well, I will periodically have sort of like these, memories that are almost like reliving them, but it's not a flashback. A flashback, my understanding of a flashback is it is like you're almost reliving them. It's extreme memory, but it also just appears out of nowhere, boom. Like, you'll hear something or you smell something, and it's just like, boom, you're in the memory, and you're not also sort of in the real world. You're like totally engrossed. When I have these bad memories, I mean, there's definitely a link back. There's a trigger, and then it reminds me of something, and it reminds me of something, and then all of a sudden I'm, remembering something that happened 20 years ago or something. You need to have an avoidance symptom, and maybe this is why they keep wanting to put it with avoidant personality disorder. But you need to have one of these, which is staying away from places, not people, places that remind you of whatever the event was, and avoiding thinking about the event. It's sort of classic for avoidant people to ruminate, to, over and over and over and over and over again, relive something, put it through their heads 1,500 times. Think of the 50 million ways that they could have done something different, etc. Try to figure out how many different ways they were humiliated in that moment. That is opposite of PTSD behavior. Anyway, you need to have two, what they call arousal and reactive symptoms, which is being easily startled, feeling tense or on edge, difficulty sleeping, and having angry outbursts. These seem really general to me. I think that anybody could be easily startled. Difficulty sleeping could be general depression. And having angry outbursts, I can definitely see how that could be attached to avoidance, and they think, oh, you're having an angry outburst. But it's different. It's way different from throwing a tantrum, is when avoidants use anger as fuel to basically get them to get over the hump of staying silent and actually say whatever they need to say. A lot of times people use anger to do that. It's a tremendously effective tool. It's kind of mean being mad and angry at people, but really, if you need to get something done, do it. You also need to have two cognition or mood symptoms, and these would be trouble remembering key details about an event. So not like the little details, like what somebody was wearing, but like, okay, did you you know, when you got assaulted, was it day or night? When you got hit by that vehicle, was it a car or a truck? You can't remember big things like that. That's, you know, negative thoughts about oneself or the world. You know, well, I mean, if just about everybody that's avoidant has those. I mean, that's the poor self-esteem thing. Come on. About the world, yeah. Distorted feelings like guilt or blame. It's really funny that they call this distorted feeling because it doesn't feel distorted to me. I mean, yes, avoidant people want to take the blame for everything. They want to find how they are personally responsible. You know, it started snowing 2 days earlier than it was supposed to. Well, I did something. I mean, it's not usually that crazy. It's usually interactions like, you know, somebody needs to, you know, have you not to be a part of their life anymore. Well, I must have done something. I had to have done something. It can't be them. It can't be that they had something going on themselves. Um, it can't be that. It can't possibly be that, you know, their life is overwhelming and they had to have you out of it. It has to be something that you did. You caused it, you know, and again, the ruminating thoughts of what did I do? What was the mistake that I made? I must have done something to drive this person away, that sort of thing. And blame, well, you know, blame yourself. Did I just talk about this? As far as blaming somebody else for what happened, that doesn't usually happen. Usually somebody else probably is to blame and you take it on yourself. Guilt, oh, absolutely. Guilty about everything. Guilty about breathing. But again, those are avoidant. So if you have those, I don't think they should count toward being the 2 symptoms of PTSD because they're the symptoms of avoidance. Loss of interest in enjoyable activities is a sign of depression also. So those are what you need to have PTSD. And again, I can kind of see where the overlap is, but for sure where it starts. You know, avoidance needs to have a chronic condition for it to trigger. It can't, well, I mean, basically, yeah. You can't have been bullied once and then become avoidant. That's impossible. So you could have had a horrific bullying episode in school. Like, really, 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 really bad. And that could cause PTSD. But again, if you have PTSD, you don't necessarily, or you don't avoid people. I don't know. Like I said, my idea of calling somebody with avoidant personality disorder as somebody who has PTSD, I personally think that is an overuse of the term, and it is inappropriate, and it throws people off in the wrong direction. And I think that there's a huge difference between having trauma in one's past, meaning some awful thing that happened to them, and necessarily having PTSD. Obviously, people have trauma every day, and they don't get PTSD. And it's different. It's a different thing. PTSD is one thing happened to you, and it was so awful that you cannot let it go. And you become obsessed with it. And your entire life revolves around this one thing that happened to you. Avoidant personality disorder is not a one thing. Therefore, I don't think it's appropriate, and I think it muddles the issue. And to say that somebody is avoidant has PTSD, it's bad for both. It's sort of like somebody's trying to find something that PTSD is sort of well known. So if they say, oh, you have PTSD, then people maybe understand what you're going through. But it isn't. It's similar to PTSD, maybe in a little way, in this way or that way, but it's not. So if you say, I have PTSD when you're really avoidant, or vice versa, you're giving people a wrong impression. You're taking on a whole bunch of things that didn't actually happen. And with PTSD, I mean, there is therapy that you can really do tremendous work on it and even get past it. It is possible to break PTSD. It's not possible to break avoidance. And the therapies don't work. If you say, I've got PTSD, or somebody says you have PTSD, and then you do PTSD therapy, that's not going to work if you're avoidant. It's just, it doesn't match. So people get frustrated. Oh, well, you had this. Why don't you do this? I knew somebody else that had it, and it worked, and it's fine. And it's just wrong. It doesn't work. It's not going to be fine. It's something else. So, that really gets on my nerves. And again, I hear it a lot. And I can kind of understand where it's coming from. Because it's kind of like PTSD. It's just not. It's not PTSD. So, I'm repeating myself as usual. Again, you can have both. You can have both. But don't use PTSD as the shorthand if you're trying to tell somebody and they're not understanding avoidance or whatever. And if they say, well, it's like PTSD, don't say, okay, yes, it's like PTSD. It is not PTSD. It's slightly different, but you're sort of on the right track. Because it is different, and it just doesn't work to take one diagnosis and sort of smear it along a whole bunch of things, and sort of make everything normalized and homogenized and all this. It's different. It's different. So don't get caught up in that.